Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement Podcast, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. I'm Tom Finn, bring 15 years client-side procurement, finance, category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the sell side of our procurement street, and I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a company that we call Summit.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it?
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, comrade.
All right, let's get started. I feel like we haven't talked in forever, Alan. It's been like a week and a half.
It's been single-digit days, Tom.
Maybe,
don't exaggerate.
It just feels so long.
We're just a little off of our normal rhythm, but we're trying to get back in the swing of things.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah. So, all right. So on our docket today, we'll talk about Anthropic Claude, and some computer use. You have that teed up, as well as a McKinsey. You had pulled this McKinsey one, supply chains still vulnerable. Is this is an article you read?
Yeah, it's an article that McKinsey puts out in one of their newsletters, and just talking a little bit about what we can do as procurement people to build resiliency in supply chains.
Awesome. And then back end, we'll see where we land. Got some career stuff, got some Centaurs and Cyborg conversation if we get there. But we'll see how long we mull around the first two and push each other. All right, so I will let you kick it off.
All right, wonderful.
Claude.
Brandon, if you can bring up that video, I'll do a little intro on it while you bring it up. We've got from our friends at Anthropic. They're the makers of the large language model Claude. I believe that the story behind Anthropic is their ChatGPT folks who wanted to be a little bit more careful about how they build a large language model, kind of in that whole thoughtful mode of how do we keep large language models and generative AI safe for human beings. But I think they've got one of the big, when I think about the big 4 or 5 models, they're one of the big 5. And this video really caught my eye. It's a quick 2-minute video that shows something that they're calling computer use. So think about a large language model integrated into not just your browser, but your entire computer, so it can access files on its own and basically put routines together. Go ahead, Brandon, hit play if you don't mind.
I'm Sam, and I'm one of the researchers here at Anthropic. Computer use is something that we felt was going to be important for a while now. And so today we're going to be talking about a very early version we have of computer use and walking through a representative example of the things we think it's going to be useful for.
I'm Sam.
We're going to be going through a quick demo today. In this fictional demo, a customer, in this case the Ant Equipment Company, has come to us and asked us to fill out a vendor request form. The data I need to fill out this form is scattered in various places on my computer. What we're going to do is ask Claude to look at the spreadsheet, check if Ant Equipment is in there, and if not, move over to the CRM and try and find some more information there. Once it has this data, Claude's going to then fill out the form for us and hopefully transfer the information across to the vendor form. The first thing that's going to happen is Claude's going to start taking screenshots of my screen and quickly realizes that the Ant Equipment Company isn't actually in the spreadsheet. So the first thing it does is it swaps over to a CRM and searches for the company we're interested in.
I'm curious how a lot of these things are going to be being connected. So right now the person's just typing into their browser and trying to pull information from elsewhere.
Luckily, we get a search match, and Claude then starts scrolling through the page, looking for all the information it needs to fill out this form.
So a screen scraper.
Claude then autonomously starts transferring the information across without me having to do anything. And goes through the steps and fills out all the information needed. And then submits the form. this example is representative of a lot of drudge work that people have to do. This is available in the API. We're excited for people to try it, and we should expect things to get a lot better over the coming months.
All right, that's cool. Thanks, Brandon. So yeah, so basically, what I thought about when I watched this video. So the predecessor company to Summit Procurement was a company called Prime Vector. I started it with two other founders, and our whole purpose in life was we were going to be a managed services business in the RPA world. RPA, if you remember it from ancient history, is called RPA because it stands for robotic process automation. And the whole idea was it's basically like a software bot that runs on your desktop, and it acts just like you behind the keys. It can log into different systems. It can scrape different information and do different tasks. And that company, or our focus on going after RPA lasted for about maybe 9 months when we found out, okay, this is like a toy. Not many companies are really using this. So we had to fall back on kind of the famous pivot, fall back on a different set of work that we did for about 6 years at Prime Vector before we eventually morphed into what is today Summit Procurement. But I watched this video and it reminded me of the RPA world. But what's interesting is it's a much closer tie to artificial intelligence, so that hopefully the dumb software bots that were not quite as successful as they needed to be in the RPA world, hopefully with a little augmentation of artificial intelligence, there's going to be a better use case for this. And I can't wait to try this because you think, he said, take out the drudge work. There's so much drudgery in my average day, probably in most people's average day, just stuff you have to fill out and seemingly in triplicate, a big waste of time. And it strikes me that if you could train an AI to be more like you across the course of months and years, it's going to be pretty good. It's going to know where to find information. It's going to be able to know which information is the correct information, and hopefully take some of that drudgery out, really make us more efficient. I don't know, Tom, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, because I love this stuff. I love the whole RPA. Like I remember when that was still hot, and that Google search term was was way above AI. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, but specific to like these use cases, when it comes, what a lot of companies will, I think, like a wall they're going to run into is going to be just access across the different softwares you have, and giving, in this case, Claude, like open access to the computer, essentially. If you just think about like a workflow for your company, or how you have either Google Drives or your Microsoft Office set up, like folks have access to certain documents. Like, you don't want everyone in your company to have salary, things of that nature. So that's
Right.
like a very common one that folks get anxious about, and a lot of financial data if you're a public company. So there's different APIs, which is like a back end like connection to the database that every software essentially has if it's running on the cloud. So just call it connection points that need to be set up in many cases. So if for a regular, like where a lot of data sits for companies, it'll sit in your ERP, which is usually where, like, let's say maybe there's three. Let's say you might have your purchase order system with the requisitions. You might have, or you will have your ERP, where in some cases like SAP's both, but without us, where the financial data and like some of maybe your supply chain stuff will sit. And then you'll have like a Salesforce, right, where all of your contacts and folks you want that your salespeople are reaching out to, it stores all that information. So do you want your client list accessible? Do you want the ERP data accessible for everybody? I mean, the answer is no. So then how do you let AI into your system while still locking it down? There's some programs that do it today. It's just going to be one that I think will hold folks up, especially I do think more in like the manufacturing side. They tend to be laggards when it comes to technology. And they really hate disruption. So yeah, I mean, that's my first thought, Alan. But I love it. But I think that's a hurdle that needs to be jumped over.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think obviously this was a 2-minute demo. Obviously, they're gonna show the best use case scenario. The proof of the pudding comes in the tasting, where we have to see, okay, does it actually do what they showed that it does? Yeah, I have a large reason to be skeptical, just because oftentimes, the truth of what these systems can do is far behind what they show. And I agree with you. There's some privacy concerns here, but I think also, it's like a password keeper, or it's like any other system that you use on your laptop. Feels like it could be trained. It feels like it could know which fields are private. Maybe you could even mark it as such. Maybe it would prompt you, much like a password keeper does, to say, okay, do you want to share? It's asking for this piece of information. Do you want to share it? So you have to have a little human intervention. It does feel like there are a lot of questions, but I'm hopeful. Feels like these things are generally marching in the right direction. And even if we're skeptical and we say, okay, it's not going to impact me in 2025, but maybe it will impact me in the 2030s. That's being a bit pessimistic, but I'll take it. Like this is a move in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I was reading this article just yesterday, and it was this woman. It was a New York Times article, and this woman, she outsourced her decision making for I think a week to all the different chat bots, and which is like a super cool idea to do, right? It was like, what color am I going to paint my my room? Right, I need to paint my room. Like, what kind of haircut should I get? These are all the things she went through. The first thing I thought was interesting is she said that when talking to all the AI folks, Claude is the smartest. So the one that you showed is considered like the smartest, and it was the only one that wouldn't let her that wouldn't do it for her. It was basically like, you don't want me to do this. It kind of came back and said like a version of that. Like, I'll walk you through it, I'll help you out, but don't have me make decisions for you. So I thought that was just one interesting piece. But then the other, she kind of had this like 3 bullet point that she kind of said on a whim. It was like, we outsourced our ability for directions to Google Maps, right?
Yes.
We outsourced our like that knowledge holding capacity to search. And what are we going to let? So I mean, if you think about it, if I don't recall a lot of historical stuff because I just know I can Google it, right? We call it Googling.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do with AI? And what is it going to take away from us that historically we've done? I do think the repetitive tasks is like the first piece, but I think there's a bit beyond that. There's like, what maybe don't we want it to do? The others we wanted it to do. We wanted it to take off that knowledge aspect and the directions. We don't like that. And it was upgraded it with traffic. But what don't we want it to take? I think is going to be the really interesting conversation over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. Here's a great example of what I want it to take. I had to, running a new business, I had to buy a whole bunch of business insurance. You can't imagine how much insurance. I'm insured to the teeth. I filled out forms.
I asked for it, Alan.
Yes, you are part of the reason, Tom. Part of the problem. But it all makes sense. It's good to have this. You're running a business.
Risk. It's good for you too, Alan. That'd be my pitch to you. It's good for you too.
Yeah. Oh, it's good for me. But I'll tell you what's not good for me. After filling out all those insurance forms, and it's complicated. They ask tough questions, and it's got to punch in this account number and this revenue number and these clients. And now a year later, they come back. We need them all over again because it's a new year and we have to update our information. So this is probably, I'm not making this up. This is probably something I'll spend 4 to 6 hours doing. And it's just hard to find that time to do it. It's 90% of it's probably a lot of the same answers. So can this make it easier for me? Can it watch me do it one time and then the next time maybe make it easier for me to do? I don't know. We'll see. Could be a fun thing.
Yeah, we should. So a lot of these, especially Claude, is well known for the ability to code, and there's other companies that are kind of taken to the next step where they'll tie in Claude, but then do more front end things and other decision points for it. But you can now create apps that are quite decent, I think, with just prompting.
Mm-hmm.
We should go through one of those things at one time, Alan. We should just like build something and show what could be done within these. We can brainstorm it. I can do the prompting and going through it. I like that stuff, but I think we should show what's doable with some of these things today, because I think I think they'd be interesting for folks.
Okay.
Be interesting
so
for
what
me.
you're saying is sign up.
Yeah,
for
I'm being non-committal, but make me commit, Alan. I'm being non-committal here because I'm like, do I want to say this out loud? But yeah, I think we should. But say it back to me.
Yes, we will bring this live to you on a podcast. The downside is you can't just listen to it; you have to watch it. but we could do good color commentary. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Or we
so
could
that was
just
just
show
kind of
us done. We could show us done. Maybe we
Yeah.
can record offline and show us done.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I thought that was an interesting topic. Another news topic that I ran across this week is basically, I used to work for McKinsey, and I try to keep my eye on their newsletters. They wrote an article entitled "Supply Chains Still Vulnerable," and basically they said, post 2020, when we had the big supply chain disruptions that COVID-19 brought, there was a big push after COVID to really build resiliency into supply chains. How do we make it so that we're not dependent upon one supplier or one region or one geography? How do we make sure that we've got backup sources of supply so that when one component goes out, the whole supply chain isn't knocked down? And I thought they did a really good job talking about how certain measures were put in place immediately post pandemic, and then the thing that was interesting to me was they said, but while we made great strides in 2023, we've slipped a good bit now moving into 2024, 2025. So I'll just share this graph that they had in this chart that they had inside the article itself. Basically, it said we were doing something like 7% per year for the first couple of years post pandemic, and then we've slowed down to a couple of percent per year in terms of building and resiliency. It's kind of flatlined, is what they've said. And I thought this was interesting because this really talks about things that procurement people can do. So nearshoring and regionalization were a couple of things you could do to build resiliency into your supply chain, building up inventory buffers. And then very importantly, I think one of the things that all good category managers should be thinking about is dual sourcing. So not only does dual sourcing get you resiliency in your supply chain, it gets you the ability to test a supply base and to test new sources of supply. It gives you the ability to test pricing and quality. So this notion of dual sourcing, I thought, was hugely important, and I thought it was very, very a very good thing to talk about on this podcast. Tom, thoughts?
Yeah, and maybe just to outline or play by play it a little bit. So from 2020 to 2021, there was actually a dip, call it a big dip in regionalization and nearshoring, while inventory buffers and dual sourcing started to increase. So through 2021, and then that continued through 2022. And actually, an interesting thing on this chart here, Alan, is that it looks like regionalization and nearshoring kind of are like lagging in responsiveness to dual sourcing and inventory buffers. I don't have any input on there. It's just something that I see.
Yeah,
I think what's
a hypothesis might be that that's number one, it's tougher to do, so it takes a bit longer.
Sure.
Number two, that might be an overlapping secondary trend. So not only does nearshoring regionalization help you with supply chain resiliency, but it also, as things started to change in China, and we started to talk about the great what did they call it, the great decoupling. Everybody, it was kind of like a secondary trend. So maybe that's what's pushing that.
Yeah, but it is so everything's essentially dipped from 2023 or flatline, but kind of more dipped from 2023 to 2024. I mean, looking at this from the aspect of just a company, right, outside of procurement, so what does dual sourcing generally brings you? You might have like champion challenger type models, where you might start bringing in another company to compete, the dual sourcing aspect of it. When you do that, it's not something that it can lead to cost savings at first, where, okay, I have this other competitor, whatever, 80% of the price, you primary company bringing down your price as well. That does work sometimes up front, but then it comes to, hey, if like a year later, 2 years later is, hey, if you give me more of the business again, I can reduce my costs more because I can spread the overhead, blah, 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 blah. So that I could see being what happened maybe from 22 to 24. The buffers in inventory buffers is money. That is cash tied up in, if you're holding more of a product, you've essentially exchanged dollars for more product early. That's what the buffer is. So you have money sitting in inventory that in some cases can expire, even if it's a chemical or a non-food good. So that's, I could understand. A lot of companies don't like inventory. They prefer to be that just in time. Everyone was super jealous of Dell when they came out and they like did the air quotes just in time. And then
That's right.
eventually they got screwed up because they couldn't keep up with the just-in-time model. You do have to have an inventory buffer. So there's the first two there, Alan. And then I guess on the regionalization, nearshoring, regionalization being I have my customer in a certain place, or I have my manufacturing site in a certain place. I want my suppliers around me. Nearshoring is usually considered for the U.S. kind of more. I want a more local, as opposed to I want support from Mexico, from the United States, or Canada versus India or Singapore.
Yep.
So, but yeah, that's I think that's super interesting, just how things have flatlined or decreased there.
So category managers, have at it. Keep going. It's a good thing. I think that the people who do this on a regular basis are good. And brings to mind one of my favorite category managers who will remain nameless. He'll be a guest on the pod at some point in time. But he actually was the largest buyer of petroleum coke in the world. He bought for Alcoa, the aluminum company. Petroleum coke is basically one of the inputs. It's Coke. Most people know Coke.
Yeah, this is not cocaine. This is not petroleum-based cocaine. This is Coke.
No.
Yeah.
This is Coke,
like charcoal.
which is a carbon. Yeah, charcoal, a carbon product. And typically it comes from coal, but you could also make a Coke from petroleum, from oil. And so he was a buyer of petroleum coke. And he actually left Alcoa. He now works for a company that, as a category manager, he reached out to. He said, there aren't many people who make petroleum coke in the world. They're the biggest. There might be 3 or 4, a handful that do this. And he knew all of them. And then there was this new entrant that showed up on the scene. He's like, who are these guys? And he said, I went to their website and all I could find was an info@ web address. And he said, I wrote it 100 times before they finally wrote me back. And then they ended up hiring him. So he's got a pretty sweet gig now.
That's generally those websites.
The sort of thing, yeah.
no one monitors that info@ especially when you're decently sized.
No. Especially if you're just starting out. So, but my point is, category managers have to be curious. You got to be that sort of a guy because sources of supply are all over the place. You just have to be curious and resourceful in your pursuit.
Yeah, and evaluating, because the life cycle of things, it does go back and forth, right? Things do go centralized and decentralized. And they happen like that for a reason, because there's a balance that you're not hitting on either. So you kind of move, and then eventually, hopefully, you hit the right spot. That seems to work. So yeah, I think that's just a balancing and rebalancing. Very cool. Yeah, I had another one on here, Alan, that I don't know if it rolls into the next, but it kind of goes with supply chain and ties maybe a little bit back into the AI piece. And we're jumping around a bit today, but staying on the supply chain is top of mind because I listened to this yesterday. Do you know Andreessen Horowitz, right? You familiar? Mark Andreessen? Okay.
Yes, one of the top 5 VC venture capital firms in the world.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's like those guys in SoftBank. I mean, those guys, it was like Andreessen was like, had a lot of money, and then SoftBank blew him out of the water for the amount of money they were managing. But yeah, obviously they're like 2 tech titans, and they invest a lot in technology, and they have a lot of winners and a lot of losers, but that's VC for you. But it was interesting to me because they were going through the supply chain for essentially like where like the robots and this whole AI thing will take us. And they had an interesting perspective. They actually walked through, we should put this podcast in the notes, because they walked through the supply chain of drones and robots and related that to, say, like the car industry, where essentially you need to have, like, not only is Ford in Detroit, for example, but then you have the suppliers right outside. So you might have even like the screw and the, your engine supplier and some of the bigger parts that might come from further. But you have a lot of like localized mom and pop shops that are built up around Detroit and then got, somewhat hurt, and then are built up around in the US to be around the like some in the South where we have different plants. You'll have just smaller that they need things quickly, needs to be a decent price, and they could do it more locally, regionalized. In China, they have a lot of those widgets in like Shenzhen, which is I mean, it was a CNBC something a long time ago on Shenzhen, and I mean the place is pretty unbelievable for the things that they make. But just on a go forward, and then I'll get your take. Essentially, there's like 3 steps to it. There's the parts to build the parts, which is like the equipment. So manufacturing sites, whether it's for cars or robots, you're going to have certain things that go into the equipment itself. Like if it's like pumps or if it's like anything manufacturing, to fix them quickly, and they need to have, it could just be even warehouse stocking, they need to be close.
Yep.
So you have the parts to build the parts. You then have the parts to build, in this case, the robots or the cars. So that's also generally localized. And then you have the plant that builds the thing, right? The plant that builds the robots, the plant that builds the cars. And the US has seen this with Detroit. Germany had, I think it's Mittelstadt, somewhere around that pronunciation. You might be able to pronounce it properly, being from Pittsburgh, all the Germans local to there. And then in China, you have that Shenzhen and some of those other areas that can do it for the robots. Also drones. Drones are essentially just built in China. But yeah, just from a supply chain perspective, I thought it was quite interesting that a lot of that lives in China. And if the robots are the future, it's going to be curious how that comes about in the United States, given it's difficult to build manufacturing sites here. But yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah, that's a lot of wisdom there. I like your thinking on that. Should we jump into some deeper dive topics?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So one of my favorite, I thought, I think we kind of hinted at last week or week before last episode, we talked about how large language models, generative AI, artificial intelligence can help people who are in the consulting field, how they make us basically smarter, white collar workers, how they make us more intelligent and better. And one of my favorite articles from 2023 was an article called "Centaurs and Cyborgs on the Jagged Frontier."
This is a good one.
It's a mouthful, and it's kind of a strange. I think it's kind of a strange sounding article.
Yeah, I actually dislike the title. I would have never read it. I would have never read it, but content, cool.
Yeah, but this guy Ethan Mollick, who wrote it, I think he's a Wharton Business School professor. So maybe a little bit too academic, the title. I'll let everybody really jump in to try and figure out the deeper meaning of the title. But basically, he's one of the more interesting writers on large language models and generative AI, and he makes a big case for why white collar workers should be using more generative AI in the work that they do. And this very first chart, this very first exhibit in the article itself, really tells the story. So basically, the gist of the story is that there were 750 BCG, Boston Consulting Group consultants, who were made available to this Wharton professor, and over the span of probably something like 6 months, he broke them into 4 different groups. Three different groups. So 750 into 3 different groups. So you say 250 in each cohort. And he basically said, the first 250, you're going to do business as usual. You're not going to change anything you do. You're not going to use AI. You're specifically not going to use AI in the work that you do for your clients. Then the second group of 250, they said, no, I'm going to let you guys use large language models, and I want you to try and specifically use them as much as you possibly can. And the third group was only a slight difference from the second group. Said, you guys are going to use generative AI in the work that you do. You're going to use ChatGPT and the rest. But in addition, you're going to attend some training classes so we can train you how to be smarter with things like prompting and how to figure out where to use it in your work. And the upshot of the study was just absolutely fascinating. You can see it here in the chart that shows the different kind of distributions of how people fared. This one is specifically the measure of quality, where it said the quality of the work product that the consultants who used AI, both the trained and the untrained users of AI did, was 25% greater than those who did not use AI in the work that they did. So that was a metric of quality. That was I'm sorry, I said 25%. That was a 40% increase in quality. But they also noticed that there was a 25% increase in speed. So they were able to get tasks done 25% more quickly. And in addition, the total quantity of tasks that the upper two groups were able to accomplish was 12% greater than what the lower group was able to accomplish. So they saw, like this magic trifecta: quantity, speed, and quality of work product all went up for those using large language models. And when you think about those numbers, those are just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, it's almost a crime not to use generative AI in the work that you do if you are a knowledge worker, if you are a white collar worker.
Yeah, and call it. I mean, without whipping out the calculator, call it if those are like to finish more tasks is one piece of like better. If the equation for better is you do more, you do it quicker, and it's better quality. Like if you just bring those numbers together, you're probably like 60-ish% better, right, than without using AI.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, the person who wrote the article, the professor, said that the jagged edge in the title was a reference to things that AI does well versus things that AI does not do well. And he said it's jagged edge because you got to figure out across all the work that you do what it does well, what it doesn't do well. It is remarkable at some things and terrible at other things. And figuring out that frontier is hugely important for knowledge workers. You have to figure out that jagged edge. And the Centaur cyborg reference was really about us, the knowledge workers, the white collar workers who need to try to figure out, where do I use this? Where don't I use this? So don't just be a man, be a centaur, which is half man, half animal, half computer. Cyborg is a little bit more integrated. You got to figure out on that jagged frontier, that jagged edge. You got to figure out what it's good at, what it's not good at, and where you can make it apply in your life, which I thought was a good, this is kind of one of the themes that you and I bang on all the time, Tom, which is you got to be curious, you got to try things.
Yeah. And for AI, you're the boss, right? You end up, even if you're an individual contributor, consider yourself the boss that has to get your junior analyst or senior analyst up to speed and understanding what the requirements are, and then figure out what's the right thing to delegate and what's the right thing to hold on to, and then how to communicate.
Perfect. I love it. You want to morph that right into your next topic around delegation? Because I think that's a great a topic I think about every day. Delegation.
Unplanned, but I think pertinent to exactly that conversation. So I think you and I have talked about this delegation aspect too. But just as you go through your career, and actually given AI, maybe it's even a little earlier in your career than historically, because you can use AI to delegate things too. But just the importance of delegation and moving things off your plate that maybe someone else or something else can do better than you. So in a lot of just the historical context would be as you get promoted through into management, you've always been good at something and you kind of knocked it out of the park. And as you go into manager level and actually C-suite, if that's where you land, like there's things that you have to take off your plate, which especially as you go up ends up being most things, you got to change what you're doing. But what do you give to other people? How do you communicate that to other people to make sure it gets done? And then also laying out those expectations. So I saw was a tweet yesterday. I was just reminded that this was on our docket, and this guy that I follow, Girdley, he's one of the I don't know which Twitter section he falls under, but he's kind of the entrepreneurial side. But he's always a good follow, and has some decent humor with things. But he took something from Andrew Lynch and he kind of adapted it for himself, which was the 5 key things to communicate every time you delegate a specific task. So I'll lay them out here. I don't have them in a doc, but the first is output and result, which is you have to explain what the expectations are. And when someone's doing something, what does it kind of look like or sound like at the end? So the end result, I'll just read through them first. So end result, the purpose, why you're doing it, was the point. The inputs, so what do you need to do to succeed? So like if there's any data, you kind of give them the sense. In some cases you won't know. but if you have it, give it. Constraints, budget, timeline, scope, one, I'll come back to it, and then any next steps that are going to follow through. It's just to hit each, Alan, then I'll get your perspective. So the output and result, kind of talk through it. The purpose of, start with why. People like to know a reason, even if it's not necessarily the most important, but it helps you also reflect to say, is this important as you delegate it out? The inputs, I'll kind of leave that. People can figure it out on their own for the inputs, unless you're more junior. But if there is, add it. Constraints, a way to deal with constraints that is effective is to ask people also when they can get it done by, and then if it needs to be brought back, bring it back. If they have a little more time, you can say. But given a timeline is an important piece. And then the last one for next steps, like if there's a schedule or a next thing to do, you kind of lay that out up front too. So schedule 30 minutes with me next week, et cetera, et cetera. We'll review it together, things of that nature. What's your, I feel like you have some mental models for delegation, Alan.
Yeah, well, I wish I had better mental models.
I teed that up like you had one prepped. No, I just feel like you think through these things a lot.
No, I actually think that this might be the superpower that as you rise through your career, this is the superpower that you need to continually work on. It's the thing that you can never be good enough at, but you need to keep working on becoming better at. And I think I'm kind of terrible at it. I am a perfectionist, and I'm a person who likes to do work. Therefore, when I see something, I say, I could do that. And then I think, yeah, I can do that. Then if you added up all those I could do that's, you get 10 humans of worth of labor. And it's like, okay, I'm one human, right? I can't do it. So I do have to delegate. And on the other side of that coin, I think about the best experiences that I've had in my career is when I worked for a manager, worked for a boss who really gave me a lot of room to roam, who said, here's your job, here's your mission. If you choose to accept it, go and let me run with it. That's so, I know that it's a key to being a good manager. It's a key to getting a lot of things done and being very, very effective and very efficient. So as far as mental models go, I'll just give you one. Like, I keep a to-do list. It's not a great to-do list because I find that writing down to-dos, sometimes it's better just to do them rather than to write them down. But I aspire to be better at a to-do list. One of the things that I want to do, as soon as I add something to my to-do list, I want to think through, is this better done by somebody else? Can I delegate this to someone? And I want to think that immediately, because oftentimes I'll wait to delegate until I'm 2 weeks behind on a due date. I'm like, oh, let me give this to Tom. Hey, Tom, you mind doing this? Yeah, when's it due? Yesterday. So, you think about that, the supply chain of that sort of delegation is just terrible. So if you can, when you know that you have the task, if the first thing you can do is delegate it, that gives the other person a chance to have as much time as possible to work on it. So I think as far as a framework goes, that's kind of my framework, which is add it to a to-do list. And then as you're writing it down, think to yourself, can I delegate this to someone? And be a little bit more liberal in your thinking there. Give tasks to other people. I think that's going to be the best way to be successful.
Yeah, I've also thought about it a very similar way with when I look back on my experiences, stressful or not at the time, like what did I get the most out of? And it's when people empower you to actually do the work and do it the way that the kind of you want. And then there's a little bit of flexibility in the outcome, but you get to, maybe it's the creative aspect of me. That's how you balance out creativity by doing those things. Yeah. And I think very similarly in that, all right, I want to create that for other people, and I want other people with that similar mindset, working for me when they do. And yeah, you want to treat people in that fashion too. I think most people want that ability. Not everyone always knows how to handle some of that responsibility, but then that's also you. I mean, there's multiple aspects of being a manager, right? It's not just delegation. It's also some coaching aspects and things of that nature for how they could get better. But yeah, I think the one that was very helpful for me, like the idea. Have you read this? I was trying to find the name of it, and I did. There was a Harvard Business Review. It was an article called "Management Time: Who's Got the Monkey?" Have you ever read the Who's Got the Monkey?
No,
Oh,
I don't think
man.
so.
No? So the idea
Send
is
it.
how you, I'm going to butcher this because I have not read this in years, but essentially it's how, if you consider every task you have as a monkey that gets added to your shoulders, like how many monkeys do you end up? You gave the perfect example, which is like, I agreed to 10 things and then I didn't give them out in time until afterwards. So you had essentially 10 monkeys on your shoulders that you could have handed out to whomever, just insert, person 1, person 2, person 3, or even just handed something off to someone else that is a peer at your company that is better to handle. But unfortunately now it's with
Absolutely.
you and you're stressing out over it. Who's got the monkey? That's always been a very good visual for me.
I do like that a lot. And yes, I do end up with 10 monkeys on my back, and then I'm like, just drop them all, just throw them all around, and that's just terrible. That's a recipe for bad management and disaster. But it's interesting to think about the conversation we're having. It is a little bit like the conversation we had a few weeks ago about systems versus work. In many ways, delegation is a system, and it's something you need to get to be good at. It is if you get to be good at playing checkers, then you go to chess. But then if you're Mr. Spock on Star Wars, then you play 3-dimensional chess. And it strikes me that a lot of these higher order management tasks, things to be successful as you rise in your career, are all about playing 3-dimensional chess. To understand how to delegate better, to understand how to manage people as they do these delegated tasks, to give them coaching and support and removing roadblocks to them doing the task. It's completely different from what you learn early in your career where you are doing the work and you just learn how to become very efficient at slamming through work. Well, this is the exact opposite. So it's like a whole nother game that you have to retrain your brain in doing. And I find that it's complicated, but fun.
Yeah. And a lot of folks end up feeling the need to continue to do it. I mean, that leads to a lot of stress, but even it does take away from your employees. And I'm also not great, Alan. So I'm speaking here, I'm preaching, but I'm not, I don't do great on my side all the time either, because it is a different piece of the brain. But you're taking away from what probably made you really good or really enjoyed certain pieces of your career when you're micromanaging and not guiding the person. So, I mean, if you have good people, I mean, that's kind of the starting point. Good people work hard to figure it out. So yeah, it is definitely that balance. But one thing you also have to get good at is hopefully people succeed all the time, but when they don't, that doesn't land on you as well. So delegating the right things to the right people, that also is a skill set that needs to be learned.
Yeah,
so not everyone can take everything.
That's good. I love the philosophical discussion of our nature. Hopefully listeners are finding this helpful.
as we air our dirty laundry of not being great at it, but knowing, I mean, everyone usually know what you need to do, right? So you could talk about it, but the implementation, that's on everyone to improve.
Good.
All
good.
right.
Good pod this week. Good discussions.
Yeah, we got some other things. I think we could hold off on them till next week. What do you think, Alan?
Yep. I think it's good. It's a wrap.
All right, that's the podcast. All right, it's good talking with you, Alan.
Thanks, Tom.
All right.
Yeah, as always. See you soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebuild Procurement podcast. Like and subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest procurement content.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it.
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, comrade.
Rebuild.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.
Rebuild.